Welcome to Let's Talk FM. So today we are extremely excited to be speaking with Peter Pritchard, Group CEO at Pets at Home. Now, Peter joined Pets at Home in 2011 as Commercial Director and was appointed Group CEO in April 2018. Peter has worked in retail for over 30 years in various senior operational and commercial roles at Asda, Sainsbury's, Iceland, M&S and Wilkinson's. I hope I've covered them all, Peter. And Peter has also a master's degree in business administration from Stirling University. Now, for all our viewers, please remember to get your questions in via the chat function, and we'll do our best to get all your questions answered. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Josh, and you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Really great to have you here. So, Peter, we want to start by just talking a little bit about you. You've had an incredible journey in retail, and are you able to share with us how you ended up in retail and the challenges you experienced along the way to becoming Group CEO of the UK's leading pet care business?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I've spent my entire life in retail, literally from the age of 16 when I was at college, and I had my first part-time job at Marks and Spencer in Bootle. And if anybody knows Bootle, which is in Liverpool, I think it's twinned with Beirut. It's quite a challenging place to both grow up and work. And I got a real taste for retail. And actually, as I reflect back, I think what I got a taste for is working with customers and the fact that retail changes so fast. And I think we can all see that more. We can see that now. But actually, in my entire time in retail, which is now probably sad to say, actually, I think come up to 35 years, which is really scary. You just see a constant evolution of life, because actually retail reflects life. So whatever happens in our human lives, in the outside world, actually reflects retail, because we serve people and we serve customers, and therefore, of course, it happens. So I've been very lucky. Literally, retail is one of those areas where actually it's quite common to find people who run an organisation having grown up in retail, and I can genuinely say I've done most jobs on the way up. So it gives me a great understanding of how the organisation works, how retailers work. But I guess where I am today is slightly different, because we are part retailer, but we're also a services business. So about 30% of our business is in veterinary operations, which is a fast growing part of our business. But when you really boil it down, actually what we really are, and how I define my career is, my job has always been about servicing people's needs. And the best retailers understand people's needs, understand what's going on in their lives, and are very good at connecting their business with them. And that's how we create value. And so I think that's really what I've done most of my life in a consumer-facing business.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I absolutely agree. Retail is a changing landscape, and for someone who is looking to start a career in retail or services, what advice would you give them starting today?
Yeah, I think you can't work in this environment if you don't like people. I know it goes without saying, but retail is a people-driven organisation, because we're either serving customers or you're serving somebody who is serving a customer. So I think first and foremost, you've got to like people. You've got to like a dynamic environment. And often when you think of retail, you think of the obvious point, which is the stores, the front end. But of course, in retail, you've got accountants, you've got logisticians, you've got IT, you've got data scientists, you've got buyers, you've got marketeers. So they're little ecosystems in their own right. But underneath it all, you've got to have a passion for wanting to serve people. And I think if you have that passion and you want to do that, I think retail is one of those phenomenal areas where you get the opportunity to genuinely do lots of different things. So I've done many jobs in my time, although my real background is commercial. I've done loads of things. I've built superstores, I've run facilities teams. And you wouldn't necessarily get the opportunity, I think, in the accountancy profession, for example. But I think retail really gives you the opportunity to go through many different experiences. So my advice to people would be, if that's something that really floats your boat, go to a retailer, because you've got the opportunity to go and try lots of things until you find the area that you think really works well for you.
No, absolutely. So Peter, you were one of the few retailers to remain open during COVID-19. I'm sure you've never experienced anything like the current situation before. You had to adapt. And in the wake of COVID-19, what measures did you put in place?
Yeah.
And how did you decide what measures to put in place?
Look, unless you were an amazingly good business, there wasn't a playbook on the shelf called Disaster Recovery COVID-19 Special Edition. We've all done our planning, in case the building burns down or you have a serious incident. But I think very few businesses have ever really have thought through pandemic in both the size, the scale, and the speed at which this happened. So being open all the way through, and this is now sort of 20 weeks, and I can't quite remember what life was like before COVID. What it required was unbelievable speed and agility to respond both to government advice, respond to consumers, because don't forget, prior to lockdown, we, like many businesses, experienced a spate of panic buying, and that put the business under an awful lot of stress and strains. And then we have had to pretty much rewrite everything that we do in days and hours, not weeks and months. So the organization and the decision making is absolutely key through these sort of periods of times. And at the very beginning of this, and I've got this one document which has guided us all the way through, is before we got into the absolute panic stage of COVID, we as an executive team did two things. We wrote down what was really important to keep ourselves focused and prioritized all the way through. And there's a lot of things there, like our values, our principles, and what we felt was really important, like the health and safety of our people, the health and safety of our pets. And we kept that to one side because it was really important that we kept on coming back to it. But then what we also knew was important is fast decision making as closest to the point of delivery as physically possible. So we reorganized ourselves in a way that allowed us to review what was going on in the early days twice a day, make decisions twice a day, and enact plans once a day. And that also included how we communicated to keep everybody in the organization aligned and actions. And we recognized something really early, and this, I think, is very much about the culture of our organization. It's very easy to think about the obvious things like, oh, we need protective screens in the stores and we need to install tape on the floor. That's the obvious stuff, and most businesses have done that really well. But we spend as much time thinking about the impact on people. We'd have a workforce of people who are frightened. What do you do? You've got a workforce of people who actually might need to self-isolate at short notice, so you're going to have high absentee rates. What do you do? You've got people who can't get to work because they can't use public transport. What do you do? And underneath that, recognizing how people felt, the impact on their well-being, mentally, financially. So a lot of the actions we put in place were not just the obvious things. We also put in place a whole series of measures to help people recognize the stresses they faced. So a couple of very simple things like we put in place a colleague hardship fund. Not for our people as such, but they are members of families, and some of their families have suddenly lost their jobs. So how do we help them? As well as rewarding our people through bonuses, but also put in place safety equipment. So it was literally a complete review of the entire business at speed. And I'm really glad we were open for 20 weeks because we've been able to see how the organization and how customers have responded. And I think we are at a distinct advantage as a consequence. So today, 20 weeks in, this feels terribly normal. And we're now focused on other things. But I think businesses that have only just started to come back are about to go through what we've been through the last 6 weeks before that.
Well, I'm absolutely sure you've been inundated with phone calls from other CEOs within the retail industry, because they can absolutely learn from your experience of how you've dealt with the current crisis. And because you've been doing it for now, as you say, for 20 weeks now.
Yeah, and I think one thing I think which as an exec team we've all reflected on is nobody had the answer, but somebody had created part of the solution. And I think this is where your networks are really important. So, I had some really good networks in Europe that I used because they were 3 or 4 weeks ahead of us. And, don't be proud, pick up the phone, steal shamelessly. We've also shared everything we've learned with other people. And we've constantly used the networks around us, both other CEOs, the British Retail Consortium, advisory bodies, to help us work out the answer. Because I think the real challenge for an exec team at this point in time, there's a lot of information far too much information, lots of opinion. And our job is to look at all of that and turn it into policy, turn it into actions, and then direct people. And it's really important, therefore, that you've got all of those connections to, if you find a great answer, you steal it quick and you adopt it. And equally, you take experience from other people as to what happened for them, so you don't replicate mistakes.
Is there anything that you've learned and any measures that you've put in place that you're absolutely going to keep moving forward? Because COVID will end at some point, but are there any brilliant learnings?
Yeah, there's absolutely loads. I think we've learned everything has changed because consumer behaviour's changed, and therefore some of the things that we always took for granted in terms of how we do things, which were in some cases quite manual or overly processed, we've been able to do and get the same result, and in some cases actually found better and faster results. So the ability for a customer to book a groom online at a time that suits them. It sounds stupid, but historically you had to ring up, and we had to build systems very quickly, but like a hairdresser actually, to do that. Alongside things like contact-free delivery, so you can, instead of if you've placed an order to collect in our store, you don't have to even come in the store anymore now. You tell us you're in the car park, you tell us what bay you're in, and we deliver to the boot of your car. And that's going to stay with us forever because it's just terribly convenient for customers. And there's a million and one examples of things in the operation where we've been able to go back and look at it and go, can we do this better and faster? And often the better and faster is resulted in actually contact-free and a lot of things. So there's lots of little bits of technology we've employed and lots of processes, and actually probably more importantly, loads of things we've just freed ourselves from and just stopped doing. And they're probably the most liberating ones, of things that you thought you never could let go of, and we've had to. And we suddenly discover we're still here, we're still alive, and we're still breathing. It's okay. So I think it's encouraged the organisation to be braver in some of its decision making, because I think most organisations will reflect that unless you're really forced into change, sometimes you just don't let go. And I think the best thing about COVID is you've got no choice. You've got to change it. Therefore, I think we've probably got braver as an organisation. I think loads of organisations will reflect the same thing, and that's been really powerful.
So it's sort of a silver lining to everyday operations, and I guess that was something that we always in retail were told. It was all about dwell times for customers. The longer they were in the store, the more they would buy. It was about that shopping experience, and trying to bring that shopping experience into a more modern world as well. And we've kind of gone all the way back here to have to rethink about that customer journey. I mean, how are your customers finding it? I mean, obviously you've gone and got some feedback from your customers, I'm sure. How are they finding all the changes and the processes that you put in place?
I think one of the things we learned really quickly was you've got to give people and play to their fundamental needs, and their fundamental need was one of safety. And therefore demonstrating really good practice and advice when people arrive to the store, making it very clear that we're concerned for your safety, which is why we need to do certain things, and doing that in a really comforting way puts people at ease. And I've personally had more letters off customers thanking us for being open, because they recognise that's been quite a scary place for our colleagues to be, but also recognising it's been hard for us, and they do appreciate the fact that we're open for them. And I think that is a really important sentiment that we get from customers. I think that we also have to reflect on, most people recognise that nobody quite knows how this is going to pan out, but we recognise that this is what we've got for now. I don't subscribe, by the way, to the death of the high street. I don't subscribe to the death of bricks and mortar, because I can tell you now, we are serving more customers in our stores physically than we were pre-COVID. Matter of fact. So I think what we have seen is, if there are better ways to do something and there's a better experience, people have gravitated to it. And I think it really has upped the game for retailers to say, actually, what is your experience? Now, it helps for us that the fact we've actually got lots of services in our store, and therefore there are things that you only can actually do person to person. But we've been doing that over the last number of years because we recognise that's the way the business is going to go. But buying a bag of dog food isn't an experience. It's convenient. And I think we've got to understand that you can't put experience in where customers want something else. If you want convenience, don't put in experience. But if you do want convenience, make it bloody good. And if you do want an experience, make it bloody good. So I think I feel very sorry and fearful for two types of businesses, really. One, those who are just structurally just disadvantaged because maybe they've got too much space and they agreed terms 20 years ago on deals that are no longer sensible. But I also fear those who actually have nothing other than a product to sell, because the danger with that is when you're so singular focused, some bugger's always going to do it faster, cheaper, and different. And therefore, you've got to, as a brand and as an organization, as a retailer, you've got to make sure you've got multiple contacts and try and better connect with your consumer on the grounds that they want to connect. And for us, it's very simple. Customers might well buy dog food from us, but in the main, what they want to do, if you're a pet owner, you want to, you're not that fussed really about going to the pet shop or going to the vet. And actually, the vet generally is not a pleasant experience. It's normally something's gone wrong. What you're bothered about is looking after your pet, because actually that's the really wonderful part of pet ownership. Our job is to try and support it. So when people ask us, what's our role? If you asked us 10 years ago, it'd be to say, sell you a bag of dog food. If you ask me now, I say, well, our job is to be helpful, is to be supportive, is to be rewarding, and is to be convenient. That's our job. The fact that we do everything from supplying you a bag of dog food to, we'll neuter your dog, to we'll do a hip replacement or we'll do cancer care. We have this whole breadth of things that we do to be helpful. And I think that's how you've got to reframe your business. So those businesses who are selling an item or selling stuff, I think you're stuffed.
So Peter, I was looking yesterday at some of the stats versus online versus bricks and mortar, and the ONS reported that in June 2020 that e-commerce sales represented just over a third of the total sales of retail in the UK. And also, I was reading another article that in 2019, Amazon and Alibaba controlled a third of the e-commerce market globally. What are the trends in retail, and also how can you or businesses compete with the likes of Amazon and Alibaba?
Yeah. Well, look, no surprise we saw an acceleration of e-commerce because every bugger was told to stay at home, and so what are you going to do? Starve? And I think equally, you've got 1.4 million people who were told explicitly not to go out the door. They were shielding. So that drove a change in how people needed to satisfy their requirements. And ironically, I think at the same time, never has the e-commerce experience been so poor. You're queuing to get on a website, long delivery times, and a pretty ropey delivery experience when the courier arrives but can't touch it, so he chucks it over the fence. So I think it served a need. And I think in normal circumstances, that just would not be tolerated by customers. But we're in a different world, so such is life. But I think what it's done is actually has helped people understand you've got lots of choices when you shop. And in some cases, it's best done physically. In other cases, it can be done really conveniently. And for me, that's just called shopping. It's the evolution of shopping. So I'm sort of, of course, technology is making life easy and it's put more choice in the hands of the customers, and that's really good. And we've just got to flow and go with it. I think we've definitely seen a massive rise in the likes of Alibaba and Amazon because they're platforms and they have they've done an amazing job for consumers. There is always a sense check for me that when actually somebody gets too big, customers have a very good job of putting them back in their box. So I think there's always a watch out. But they're doing a great job for consumers, and the customer will ultimately decide whether Amazon and Alibaba are successful. In terms of competing with them, there's always been a David and a Goliath. I think whenever you look back through time, it was Tesco versus the small independents. It was somebody versus somebody, because there's always a battle of the big versus the small. And of course, if you remember in the battle of David and Goliath, David won. And David won by being able to run around and spot the weakness and take out his competitor. And that's the advice I'd always give to any retailer, which is when you're faced with, an army in your back garden, you've got to really think about what makes you different, what makes you more agile. And I think you can probably sum it up in terms of we have to be everything that Amazon aren't. Amazon for me is about amazing choice, good price, and bloody good fulfillment, amazing fulfillment. Okay, well, that sets a benchmark that we have to make sure our e-commerce experience tries to, at least live up to. But I've got services that Amazon don't deliver. I've got, people bring their dog shopping. Well, you can't take your dog shopping on the internet. So I think what we have to really then think about is actually what are the unique things that we can bring that Amazon can't? Because you shouldn't assume that customers want to run their lives by Amazon. They don't. It fulfills a need and they've done a really good job, but it's not going to take over their lives. I also think, as a consumer, wouldn't life be so boring if I spent my entire life sat in front of a computer, never connecting with anybody ever, seeing 40 deliveries arrive at my front door? If somebody comes to a point where actually that's not terribly convenient either. So I think the key thing is the customers in the driving seat understand their needs really well. And in doing that, the thing I think you've got to really look at as Amazon and Alibaba is they are data-fueled organizations. They know their customers really, really well, and therefore they can predict what they're going to do and can better understand their needs. And that's the real lesson, I think, for any consumer-facing organization is ask yourself the question, do you know your customer better than Amazon knows your customer? And if the answer is no, worry fast. Because you need to know that, because actually they will just take them. And that's why we've invested very heavily in data, because we've got this amazing proprietary customer data. And we know stuff about our customers that Amazon would only ever dream to know about it. And the challenge for us is how do we take that, use it to create value in a way that we can do things differently for our consumers that Amazon wouldn't even think about.
But I think it's really interesting because one of the parts with Pets at Home is building up that part of trust with your customers because of the other services that you deliver. One of the things I've noticed with Amazon, especially over this period of time, is price fluctuations have been huge. And sometimes you're paying massively over the odds for a product. So even though it's convenient, I've been going to your store in Basingstoke and I've had some very consistent and good experiences. So well done to that team to start with, because it's always been the same. But your product and your pricing is always the same, pretty close. So you think actually there's consistency there. But my pets are also with the vets there. Yeah. So obviously I would want that store to stay. So actually I would rather go and buy my product from your store in Basingstoke because my animals, and there's 4 of them, are looked after at that location. So yeah. It is. I think you're right. There is just things that retail companies like yourself and services companies can just do to build that brand awareness and that brand loyalty, I guess, still that makes the person want to visit.
And I think when you really get behind understanding your customer, you tell me a couple of things there, which tells me an awful lot about you. So if you've got a dog, and the one thing we know about dog owners, once we know the breed of your dog and we know the weight of your dog, we pretty much know how much food you should be feeding every day. So we can probably tell you when you're going to run out of food before you tell us. And I think that's where we've got to become helpful. That we turn, the act of where we create value is, you buying the dog food from us. But the act of saying, never worry that you're ever going to run out, because we know you're going to run out, and actually we're going to send it on this day, and we'll make sure that the price is good, and of course the convenience suits you. But the act of making sure you never run out is probably the more important thing. So you don't have to trek to us if you don't have to. We'll just get it to you. And I think that's the way we start to think. And we did something really simple 3 years ago, which really has changed the way we think about life. And I often talk about fleas. If you're a pet owner, fleas are they're little buggers. You get a flea, they take over your pet, and then they take over your house, and it costs you a fortune to get rid of them. And of course, the simple act of treating your pet every 4 weeks means that will never happen. It's relatively cheap to do. Most people forget until they get a house full of fleas. It costs you 200 quid to get rid. So we created a really simple proposition called our flea subscription program. So you sign up, it's £4 a month. Then every 4 weeks, it just arrives through the post. And today we've got just under, we have now something like just under 1 million subscribers in our entire business across our different subscription platforms. And this is from a bricks and mortar pet shop. And you wouldn't think that's sort of thing we would probably invent. But actually, what we understood the customer, we understood the need, and we understood the pinch points and the barriers, and we created a very simple solution which cuts through that. And I think that's where retailers have got to be really smart, because the best retailers were always very good at understanding needs. And I think the worst ones focus on selling stuff. So, we are still selling flea stuff, but the way we sell it really meets your needs. And I think there are loads of opportunities like that, because, why is Netflix being so successful? Why is Amazon Prime being so successful? Because they understood those barriers and they took them away and made it really easy. And I think that's where retailers can learn an awful lot. And the skill is most of those retailers know their customers better than Amazon do. So how are you gonna get in that and understand it and understand those trends, so you rebuild your business in a very different way? Because I think the days of selling stuff are, they're dead. They're just gone, because there'll always be somebody cheaper. And and Amazon will probably get a threat from somebody who will do it faster or cheaper. The real connection is when you build a brand experience with the customer and you stand for more things. And I think that's the challenge. And we're on a journey. We're far from perfect. We've got loads of stuff we need to get better. But we recognized 3 years ago, as we started to change the direction of the company, that's where we needed to go. And 3 years in, we've had 3 years of unparalleled like-for-like growth. It probably tells you we might be doing something right, although we've still got loads left to do and lots of investment we need to make to be in where we want to be when we ultimately grow.
It's interesting because
you mentioned.
So I'm a member of your flea service, and it makes life so much easier because you don't forget. I mean, and that's the simple.
That's the need. You just don't forget.
Yeah, you just don't forget. So go on, Josh.
Peter, you've mentioned numerous times the message of learning, and I'm interested to know who have you been your role models in retail?
Yeah,
actually,
I'd have a long list, because I think there's a danger you take single people and you put them on a stage and say, aren't they a god, and you follow them. And actually, I think that's a bit foolish. Actually, I've built a good network over the years, and I learn all the time. And I think the one thing I think I've learned as a CEO is actually never give up on learning. Be really exploratory. Try and always take an outsider's view. Go and explore, because when you explore, you find opportunity. So I constantly try and learn. I learn from the people around me. I learn from the people inside the organization. I learn from the people who are doing the job at the sharp end. I learn from other CEOs. I think you've just got to look all the time and be open-minded that, as a retailer, you're never perfect. And the second that you declare that you're perfect, you can always guarantee you're going to be knocked off your slot. So I think you have to have a hunger to say, we've got more to do. We can always learn. And I tend to look at, I probably say we learn more from organizations who do things really well. So I think Amazon are the kings of fulfillment, but I think their engagement and emotional engagement is pretty rubbish. But then I think Lush do a fantastic store experience in terms of really helping you buy into the product. I think John Lewis give you a really sense of comfort and authority and values. And I think you can learn all the time from those organizations around you and benchmark yourself. And I think the most powerful thing is get out of your sector. If I benchmark myself versus others in my sector, we could convince ourselves we're best in class. We probably are at the top end of that. As soon as I benchmark myself against somebody outside of my scope, we're probably bottom quartile. And I think creating that constant view of where do you have those learning opportunities that you can apply to learn and make yourselves a better organization. I think what you also get, you get this lovely bit of, you lose the arrogance of the organization. Just because you're the CEO is a combination, in my experience, of luck and hard work. The second you become arrogant, you fall off your perch and some bugger wants to take your job. So I think you've got to have this constant humble approach of we can do better, we can learn, and I'm prepared to explore. And that means you don't present yourself as having the answers, which is why I don't have a single point of person I respect. I've got a long list of people I just love to learn from, who I think do good things.
No, that's really interesting. And is there anything you've wanted to change or introduce in your business career that you failed to achieve, and why was that? And what learnings did you take from that?
I think I can sum that up in a phrase I've used a few times, which is the biggest mistake I ever make and continue to make is when I don't take a decision fast enough. because I think sometimes you agonize and agonize and agonize, and then you look back and say, oh God, I wish I was a bit faster. So I think in such a dynamic environment, never seeking out perfection, but seeking out good enough is actually, is I think what I've learned. And I think whenever we've sought out perfection, by the time we've got there, the world's moved on. And we've got a perfect solution for an imperfect world. So I think my career is littered with really crap and bad decisions. And I think most people should be, if you're really honest, because actually they've always been your biggest learning experiences, because you take the time to work out what went wrong. And it's interesting. I always use that as a recruitment piece myself. I read a CV and go, yeah, don't believe it. And I'm really interested to know where the scars are. And generally, the bigger the scar, the more attractive an employee is to me, because they've got experiences rather than experience. And I think there's a difference between the two. So I could probably fill the next 15 hours of webcast of all my failures. But I don't think you'll all listen to that. It's a bit boring. But I think the key thing is you learn from them and you work out what didn't happen, because ultimately at the end of a failure is a success. It tells you an awful lot when something goes wrong, because it helps you narrow down what will work.
Well, I think clearly through your career you've had many successes, and that's evidence in your position now as Group CEO at Pets at Home, and your performance as CEO for Pets at Home, which is extremely highly regarded. So moving on to leadership and how you've responded to the current crisis. What do you believe are in the current crisis has highlighted about leadership in retail? What's the good, what's the bad, and what learnings can we take?
Yeah, I think we've seen all of those, haven't we? I think in the early days, you saw some leaders who were just downright stupid in terms of either the aggressive position they took around their people, and they sent out a message to their customers that they didn't care. And I just go, are you stupid? For heaven's sake, the world's too small to take those decisions. I think the best leaders we've seen have been the ones who have been very honest. They have been prepared to admit they haven't got the answers, but they continue to learn and they continue to do the best that they can. They don't position themselves as being the experts, but they've been very, very visible. And I think real credit. I think in the early days, I think we saw some amazing leadership from the supermarkets. I mean, having grown up in that world and knowing how finely tuned those supply chains are, I think you can look to all the big supermarkets, and I think you saw exceptional leadership from all of them in terms of being very focused on their role was to feed the nation. It actually wasn't to make money, it was to feed the nation. And they align themselves to a cause which was greater than their business. And I think, I think customers are very thankful for that. Probably not so happy about not having enough toilet rolls at the start, but forgiving. I don't think you saw a couple of leaders and organizations who put their needs ahead of the consumer. Those who price gouged, those who put their people at risk by saying, trying to deem themselves an essential business when they were clearly is on the verge of really. And I think they've done themselves an awful lot of damage, because what they demonstrated was a self-centered approach rather than the greater need. And I think we've steered a very fine line, and that's very hard because you become so centric on your organization and its survival that sometimes you forget there's a bigger issue outside, and I think you've got to keep things in perspective. And we've tried to navigate. So we've tried to be very, very, very human all the way through this. And I think as a leader, one thing I took upon myself, I'm lucky. Whilst Pets is a big company, it's a relatively big company, it's 15,000 people. I knew that my role was to be very visible, and actually I became the communicator inside the organization because I could get to a place that other people couldn't. Because I've got 10 years experience here, so I'm well known, and therefore I think I'm a trusted voice, but also I was able to communicate in the organization in a very honest way, in a very clear way. And so my job for the first 15 weeks of the crisis was a daily video, which was filmed in this room on my smartphone, saying, right, today, chaps, this is what we need to know. And God, this is hard, isn't it? And, this hasn't gone so well, and this has gone well. and be clear. And actually, I've got to say, it worked unbelievably well. And the thing I love most is very early on into the crisis, I could recognize that I had people doing extraordinary things. And I said to them, I said, look, if you've got something that's gone really well and you want to thank somebody, will you let me know? Well, God, I think I did a final count. I think I did 453 thank yous, I think was the final total I did over the next 4 weeks, of people writing to me to say, God, this colleague, went and delivered a bag of dog food to a woman who's shielding. And it created a life of its own, because through all of this, we saw people just doing extraordinary things, and bringing them to life really helped the organization connect with, we were doing something which was more powerful. We were selling stuff, we were actually losing money because of the cost of running the operation and the impact on sales, but we were helping pet owners feed their pets, and we're all pet owners, and we know that's really important. And we took an awful lot of pride in doing that, and pride in being able to do emergency care for pets who were in desperate need. And it really connected us with our greater purpose, which is to be a pet care business. Pet care is the core of it, and the core of pet care is love and a greater need. So it really allowed us to connect in such a wonderful way. But the ones who got it terribly wrong were who connected with the bottom line. And I think we're going to see more of this in the next year, of where we see people who took government funding and then pay a big dividend. How's that one work? So I think there's going to be a very clear moral approach applied to business. And I think it's great, actually, that we are held to account about not just what you do, but the behaviors of the organization. And are they, we're at the end of the day, we're British and we like to play fair, don't we? We love to play fair. And I think businesses that haven't played fair are going to be called out.
It's about this trust. I mean, all the way through that we've been doing this show, every time we've spoken about something in the FM arena, it's always been about building trust, building trust, communicating, showing what you've got to adapt to, then communicate it, then build the trust again. As you rightly say, we're learning so quickly and having to share ideas so quickly about what's happening, and everything we learn more, I guess, around the virus in its own right is changing our thought process. But it sounds like you've done absolutely the right thing, which is put your people first, build their trust, understand the journey, and just keep communicating with them. And that's something that's come up in the news this week. So going completely left field, obviously the first domestic cat was reported to have caught the virus. And I remember at the beginning of this, there was the RSPCA, I think it was, were talking about how many pets were being returned because they'd started this, and now it's being confirmed. I mean, how do you feel that that's going to impact your business, or do you think it's just news?
Yeah, it is just news. And actually, I think I've seen 7 or 8 of these through the whole of this. The first one was in Hong Kong, and all the advice, and I think it's very clear, is that the potential for a pet to infect a human, as the advice as we see it today, is pretty much there isn't any risk. Can a pet be a carrier? Absolutely. It's in the same way a handle is a carrier, or we are all carriers. So I think what we've seen through the whole of this crisis is the responsibility of media to keep things in check. So there are 18 million pets in the UK, cats and dogs, and 1 cat has been confirmed. Now, it's clearly one needs to be understood. I think so far the authorities are saying it's a bit of a freak, and we shouldn't be alarmed. I'm not sure that's actually newsworthy in the context of 1 in 18 million. But I think that says an awful lot about the amount of myth, the amount of noise, and how hard it is now to run your business in the context of not only do you have authorities trying to give news, everybody's a broadcaster. Some bloke on Facebook says this, is it true? And so I think it's been very hard, I think, in a leadership sense, to try and take a sense of all of this and cut through and give direction. And I think, God, being in government now must be the hardest job in the world, because not only are you trying to give direction, you've got 65 million people telling you what you think they should be doing, because we're now all scientists, aren't we? We're all experts on COVID, and of course the reality is none of us are. So I think it just makes life harder. But the point you really identify is it's so dynamic that every day brings a new piece of news, a new fact, and the first thing you've got to do is you've got to go, so what? Is this relevant? Do I need to do anything different? Do I just need to keep a watching brief? Do I need to find out more? Indeed, do I need to make a change? And I think that's the hard bit. It's been really hard. And I think our experience has told us this is where your internal groups really help. Your expertise coming together really helps, so you can make very considered decisions and make sure that anything you're going to do is practical and executable. And I think that has put, and I think retailers at the minute have done an amazing job because they're very good at doing it. I think some other organisations have been shambolic, and it's sort of they've fallen apart because they're not able to run in that way. But
So Peter, you've weathered the storm. What are your top tips for steering a business through today's new world towards profitability and sustainability growth?
Yeah. I don't think we've weathered the storm because I don't think the storm's over. I think we've taken the first battering, and there may well be many more weather fronts to hit us. So I think we've got to be careful that we don't lull ourselves into a false sense of security is the first thing. We do have something resembling some form of normality. For how long, we don't know, but it gives us some form of degree of certainty. I think in all these things, I would very simply say our strategy hasn't changed at all. Our job is to deliver pet care for customers, but our change is really come about how we do it. The environment's changed, customers' needs have changed, and actually we've got to be fast enough to be able to respond to them. I think the core prospects of our business are as good as ever. If anything, probably through COVID, we've seen probably more people become pet owners, more people are at home, which is really good for pets. And, our company is called Pets at Home. There's a bit of a clue really in the title. It probably is quite good for us. And I think, pets have played a really unique role. If you had a dog, it's one of the reasons why you go out for the first 12 weeks, because you're allowed to walk your dog. It's really good for exercise. And dogs have never had so much attention. I think they'd be delighted to see their owners go back to work till they get a break. So I think for us is we read the dynamics of our marketplace really well. They look good. We're seeing how customers' behaviours are changing. And the real skill as ever, bringing it back to our job, is to match our capabilities with their needs. And if you do that really well, you've got a good business. And if you don't do that, well, you don't deserve to be in business. And I think our focus is strategy unchanged, execution absolutely has to change, and it has to evolve. And you know what? I suspect over the next, if we do this interview again in 3 months' time, there'll be 20 things we didn't know that we've now had to do that we're now doing. And the secret is, did we do it fast enough, and did we do it well enough to be able to still be there?
No, absolutely. Well, Peter, I want to thank you for coming and joining us on Let's Talk FM. It's been an absolutely extremely interesting and honest interview, and you've given our audience some absolutely fantastic advice. So thank you very much. And for all our audience, we will announce our Let's Talk FM next guest in the very near future. So keep tuned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.